War teaches soldiers to fear strange things. Sometimes it's the whisper of a sniper's scope glint. Sometimes it's the silence before an artillery strike. And sometimes it's the sound of a rifle that shouldn't fire that fast. Before we go deeper, remember this name: Gewehr-43, the German semi-automatic rifle. Most soldiers called ugly, crude, even careless in design, until they faced it. If you were the one crawling through a bombed-out apartment in Belarus, lining up a clean shot on a distracted enemy, how steady would your hands really be? A Soviet marksman leans forward, scope centered. The German lifts the Gewehr-43, blocky, scarred, unimpressive. Then it speaks. One shot, then another. Then a rapid burst that rips brick fragments into the marksman's face before he can pull his own trigger. By the end of this story, you'll understand why snipers who laughed at the G43 eventually learned to fear it. The rifle did not begin as something soldiers admired. It began as a sign of how desperate the situation had become. By late 1943, German factories were struggling under pressure. Skilled workers were gone. The enemy bombed industrial centers almost daily, and older rifle designs took too much time and precision to build. The Gewehr-41 had already disappointed troops in the field. It was heavy, unreliable, and far too sensitive to dirt. A replacement was not a matter of improvement. It was a matter of survival. Engineers were ordered to create a new rifle that could be built quickly, even if it looked unfinished. Stamped steel replaced careful machining. Edges were sharp, surfaces rough, and the weapon rattled when shaken. Anyone expecting the polished feel of pre-war German craftsmanship found themselves holding something very different. But appearance no longer mattered. The priority was simple: make a semi-automatic rifle that worked well enough in the mud, cold, and chaos of the Eastern Front. When the first crates of the Gewehr-43 arrived at frontline units, reactions were mixed. Older soldiers who trusted the Mauser 98K viewed the new rifle with doubt. They knew the rhythm of a bolt action, the feel of smooth cycling, and the comfort of reliability earned through long experience. The G43 felt strange. Too many stamped parts, too much recoil for some, and a gas system that demanded care. Yet every man understood one truth: a semi-automatic weapon could change the pace of a fight. More shots in less time meant more chances to stay alive during surprise attacks or close-range skirmishes. The harsh landscape of the Eastern Front shaped these first impressions. Rifles froze solid after nights spent in trenches. Snow filled every gap. Mud dried thick on moving parts. Metal cracked under repeated stress. The G43 struggled with these elements at times, especially its extractor, which could fail if forced too hard. But compared to the troublesome G41, the new rifle felt like progress. Compared to a bolt-action rifle, it offered speed. And speed had real value. German infantry units rarely received enough G43s for everyone. A few selected men often carried them, those who were young, quick, or simply willing to experiment. These soldiers trained at the edges of small villages, firing short bursts into wooden targets, while others watched from behind ruined walls. The sharp, repetitive rhythm was unlike the familiar crack of a bolt-action Mauser. Officers noticed it immediately. A rifleman using a semi-automatic weapon could influence a battle far more quickly than one working a bolt each time he fired. Across the lines, Soviet forces prepared for the winter push into German-held territory. Snipers trained under severe conditions, learning to find angles within collapsed buildings and read the wind that slipped through shattered rooftops. They respected the accuracy of the Mauser rifles used against them, but they had learned to exploit their weaknesses. The moment a German marksman lifted his bolt, even slightly, a trained Soviet sniper could strike. Early descriptions dismissed the rifle as a crude, rushed design. Its rough construction did not impress observers. But soon, frontline accounts suggested something different. Soviet riflemen noted that German troops fired faster during ambushes, often overwhelming exposed positions before snipers could adjust. The shift was subtle at first, but unmistakable. German infantry were no longer limited by the pace of a bolt. They could send a rapid series of shots through narrow alleys, forest clearings, or broken apartment hallways. German soldiers continued learning how to manage the rifle's flaws. They cleaned the gas system more often, carried spare extractors, and used simple field repairs, wire to hold loose parts, cloth to reduce rattle, grease to smooth rough edges. These improvisations strengthened reliability. The G43, despite its rough looks, adapted easily to this kind of battlefield creativity. Winter revealed another advantage. The semi-automatic action reduced the need for wide hand movements that were difficult when fingers went numb. On the Eastern Front, a few seconds often decided who survived. With the G43, a soldier stayed behind cover longer and maintained fire as long as his magazine held. This advantage mattered in every sudden firefight, whether in forests near Leningrad or in ruined towns north of Warsaw. Slowly, the rifle earned trust. Soldiers noticed how effective it became in fast-moving skirmishes where reaction time mattered, in shattered villages, trenches cut through frozen fields, or dense woods. The G43 helped ordinary infantry push back Soviet scouts and counterattacks with a level of speed they had not enjoyed before. The rifle alone did not change battles, but it changed the rhythm of those battles. And rhythm mattered deeply in sniper territory. Soviet marksmen grew more cautious. When they spotted the squared-off shape of the G43 across a courtyard or rooftop, they understood their window of safety was smaller. A German rifleman with moderate skill could fire multiple accurate shots before a sniper completed a relocation. This reduced the advantage snipers once relied on. What began as simple caution soon became quiet respect. By the early months of 1944, the stage was set for the next evolution in the duel between snipers and riflemen. The G43 rough, rushed, and often mocked, was beginning to shift the balance in subtle but important ways. Its presence forced changes in tactics and created new forms of pressure on both sides. And the Eastern Front was about to feel those changes far more sharply. By the early summer of 1944, entire cities along the Eastern Front had become fields of shattered stone. Streets were filled with broken beams, burned bricks, and deep craters left by weeks of artillery. German positions inside these ruins depended heavily on small groups of infantry who had to react quickly to every Soviet push. This was where the Gewehr 43 began to show what it could truly do. A rifle born from rushed production was now being tested in the harshest environment possible, and its performance surprised even those who doubted it. German squads equipped with a few G43s took positions in abandoned workshops, collapsed schools, and half-destroyed apartment blocks. The men using them learned the sound and rhythm of the rifle until its recoil felt natural. They fired from dark corners or from behind overturned furniture, creating bursts of rapid shots that carried through the ruins. Soviet troops who advanced through these areas noticed the difference immediately. The usual pattern of German fire had changed. Instead of one shot followed by silence, there came a chain of shots delivered with speed and control. Soviet sniper teams moving through the same cities felt this shift more sharply than anyone else. Snipers often entered newly captured areas first, checking for German survivors and clearing elevated viewpoints. Their training taught them how to find good angles, watch corners, and detect small movements through dust or fog. For years they relied on patience and precision to counter German marksmen armed with bolt-action rifles. A sniper could wait for the bolt to lift, the small pause that always followed. That pause often meant the difference between life and death. The G43 reduced that pause to almost nothing. A German rifleman, firing the semi-automatic, could send 3 or 4 shots before a sniper adjusted position. Even without perfect accuracy, the burst forced snipers to move or risk being struck by fragments of stone, wood splinters, or the bullets themselves. This forced movement took away one of the sniper's greatest advantages: stillness. The ruins of Vitebsk, Orsha, and the outskirts of Minsk became places where this new rhythm of fire shaped every engagement. When Soviet units prepared to push deeper into these areas, Commanders warned them of increased German resistance from small pockets of defenders. Reports mentioned the surprising volume of fire coming from buildings that seemed abandoned. The source was often a rifleman with a G43 covering a narrow street or a courtyard. The Soviet frontline accounts described situations where a single German soldier with a G43 delayed an entire platoon for several minutes. The semi-automatic fire bouncing between ruined walls made German numbers seem larger than they were. The echoes created confusion about direction, forcing advancing soldiers to move more cautiously. In urban warfare, hesitation was dangerous. It gave defenders time to regroup or escape. Snipers felt this danger most clearly. They approached each ruined building with heavy attention, aware that someone inside might fire a rapid burst before they even identified the source. These sniper teams adjusted tactics by relocating more frequently, avoiding predictable windows, and using deeper shadows to mask their movement. They changed firing angles more quickly and relied more on coordinated spotting teams. None of these adaptations completely removed the threat. Meanwhile, German riflemen carrying the G43 adapted to their new role in the shifting urban battles. They learned to conserve ammunition by firing in short bursts, rather than emptying magazines too quickly. They practiced aiming at stairwells, gaps in walls, and narrow corridors where Soviet troops tended to appear. The rifle's semi-automatic capability allowed them to maintain pressure on advancing enemies even when visibility was poor. Inside these ruins, sound played a critical role. The G43's sharp cracks cut through the noise of collapsing structures and distant armored engines. German soldiers relied on this sound to coordinate movements with their squad mates. When one man opened fire, another shifted to cover a secondary angle, trusting that the rapid shots would keep Soviet heads down. This coordination made small groups of defenders far more effective than expected, especially during rearguard actions. Soviet snipers increasingly wrote about the difficulty of engaging German soldiers armed with the new rifle. Some described shots that came too quickly for them to finish their aim. Others noted that German riflemen seemed more willing to challenge them from longer distances, using the G43's ZF-4 scope to create pressure, normally expected only from trained sharpshooters. The rifle did not turn average soldiers into elite snipers, but it allowed them to interfere with sniper tactics in a way bolt actions never could. As fighting around Minsk intensified in 1944, these patterns repeated across multiple sectors. A building secured by Soviet infantry during the morning could erupt with sudden fire in the afternoon, if even a single German defender remained hidden inside with a G43. In these moments, even experienced snipers hesitated before exposing themselves to confirm a kill. A wrong assumption or a second of carelessness could bring a burst of shots that shattered brick beside their head. The pace of battle changed as well. Urban combat often involved short advances measured in meters rather than streets, with semi-automatic rifles appearing more often. The time between identifying an enemy position and coming under suppressing fire became shorter. This forced Soviet squads to rely more on grenades, smoke, and close support weapons, reducing the amount of time snipers had to operate freely. The battlefield grew louder, faster, and more unpredictable. The G43 was not perfect, but inside ruins and narrow alleys, it offered something incredibly valuable: the ability to fire again and again without breaking rhythm. For Soviet snipers, this meant that every exposed position carried new risk. For German defenders, it meant they could resist longer than expected, even in hopeless situations. The spread of the WWII along the Eastern Front forced Soviet and Allied sharpshooters to rethink almost every part of their routine. Snipers were used to hunting opponents who exposed themselves only briefly. A bolt-action rifle forced a predictable rhythm: shot, pause, reload, adjust. That pause was a small window where a trained sniper could fire with confidence. When German riflemen gained the ability to fire several shots in quick succession, the battlefield became less forgiving. A position that once felt safe for a full minute might now be unsafe after only seconds. The Soviet sniper teams responded first, because they encountered the G43 most often. Many had survived years of brutal fighting. They trusted their instincts, yet those instincts were shaped by older patterns of enemy behavior. Now, those patterns were breaking apart. A rapid burst of semi-automatic fire interrupted the calm moments snipers relied on to judge distance and wind. The sharp rhythm of the G43 pushed them to move more frequently. Even within the same building or trench line, staying still for too long invited danger. Teams began working in pairs more consistently. One sharpshooter scanned rooftops, while the other monitored windows and ground-level shadows. They used shorter observation periods and made quicker decisions on whether a target was worth engaging. The G43 forced them to prioritize survival over patience. Even highly trained marksmen discovered that positions offering a perfect angle could also become death traps once a German rifleman returned fire without the delay of lifting a bolt. Urban terrain added new layers of complexity. A sniper might see a German soldier shift behind a broken wall. In the past, that movement might lead to a clean shot. With the G43 in play, hesitation became dangerous. If the German soldier carried the semi-automatic rifle, he could fire multiple shots toward the sniper's perch, even if he had only a rough idea of its location. Shattered stone, wooden beams, and thick dust turned each return burst into a shower of debris. Snipers found themselves blinking through stinging fragments more often than before. Some Soviet units reported increased coordination between German riflemen and machine gun teams. A single G43 shot from a window could force a sniper to relocate. The moment the sniper moved, a German MG position could cover the escape route. This coordination was not always planned. Sometimes it happened naturally as defenders reacted to movement. Either way, it made the work of a sniper far more dangerous. The rifle itself did not create the trap, but it triggered the chain of events that led to it. In forests, the problem took a different shape. The G43's semi-automatic tempo cut through branches and undergrowth, creating splinters that made it harder for snipers to stay hidden. A Soviet marksman lying behind a fallen log might find his camouflage torn apart by a rapid burst. Even missed shots altered the environment. Leaves shook loose. Snow from high branches came falling down. The movement gave away positions that would have remained invisible under bolt-action fire. American soldiers encountering the G43 in Western Europe described similar experiences later in the war. They noted the rifle's harsh recoil and loud signature, but they also observed how quickly German troops adapted to the weapon's strengths. The idea of an ordinary rifleman firing almost as fast as a designated sharpshooter changed the way patrols moved through contested terrain. Although American snipers faced the G43 less frequently than their Soviet counterparts, they still recorded enough encounters to respect its capabilities. To keep pace with these changes, Soviet and American snipers adjusted their methods. They adopted faster relocation routines, sometimes shifting positions after every shot instead of every few minutes. They began choosing firing spots that offered multiple retreat angles, instead of relying on a single escape path. They used deeper shadows and tighter corners, making it harder for German riflemen to guess their location. These adaptations improved survival, but also created new challenges. Moving too often reduced accuracy. Poor lighting complicated long-range shots, and emotional pressure rose with each encounter. The psychological effect of the G43 was significant. Snipers were trained to remain calm, yet the knowledge that a single German rifleman could send a burst of shots toward them at any moment created tension that lingered long after each fight. Some described a sense of unease when entering towns, recently contested by G43-equipped defenders. The silence between buildings felt heavier. Every dark window seemed capable of producing a fast series of shots. That mental strain made long operations exhausting even before the first trigger pull. German troops sensed this shift. They noticed Soviet snipers moving with more caution and exposing themselves less frequently. They saw fewer heads briefly appear in windows or behind rubble. They realized the G43 had changed their opponent's behavior, even if only slightly. This emboldened some German riflemen, who used the rifle's tempo to challenge snipers more directly. A soldier with a ZF 4-mounted G43 could fire from a distant rooftop, forcing Soviet marksmen to retreat before securing a clean shot. However, the G43's presence did not eliminate the threat of snipers. Skilled sharpshooters remained dangerous. They adapted with discipline and patience. Snipers who mastered rapid repositioning learned to exploit moments when German riflemen paused to reload or adjust their aim. They understood that semi-automatic fire created noise, but also created patterns. Every weapon, no matter how fast, carried its own rhythm. Once those rhythms were studied, they could be countered. Still, the overall balance of power had shifted. In sniper versus rifleman duels, the advantage was no longer one-sided. The G43 allowed ordinary German infantry to contest spaces once dominated by marksmen. It created unpredictable bursts of danger, especially in tight urban combat, where echoes played tricks on the senses. It forced snipers to work harder, think faster, and move sooner. By the time the summer offensives of 1944 gained momentum, both sides had fully internalized these changes. The rifle that once drew laughter for its rough construction had now carved out a serious place in the battlefield ecosystem. It influenced how snipers operated, how riflemen defended, and how units advanced through broken terrain. By the middle of 1944, German units using the Gewehr 43 understood that the rifle was powerful, but also fragile in specific ways. The extractor could break if dragged through heavy mud. The gas system performed well when clean, but struggled after long days without maintenance. Recoil felt sharp and could jar a careless shooter off target. Yet the same soldiers who discovered these flaws also discovered how to work around them. The rifle demanded respect, and those who respected it found that it offered impressive results. German infantrymen adjusted their habits to keep the G43 functioning. Many carried a small cloth for wiping the gas system, tucked into a pocket or tied to their belt. Others kept spare extractors hidden in jacket seams or inside bread bags. Some wrapped parts of the rifle in thin strips of cloth to reduce rattle, especially when moving through dark buildings where silence mattered. These improvisations showed how the rifle evolved, not only through design, but through the creativity of soldiers who depended on it. German squads also practiced new firing methods. Instead of emptying magazines all at once, riflemen learned to fire short, controlled bursts to maintain accuracy and conserve ammunition. The G43 rewarded shooters who kept a steady grip and followed the recoil pattern. With each week of combat, the rifle became less of a mystery. It changed from a rushed wartime product into a familiar tool that soldiers trusted in the right circumstances. Confidence grew even as the overall war situation became worse for Germany. This mastery became crucial during the summer offensives launched by the Red Army. Operation Bagration pushed deep into German lines. Towns and defensive positions that had held for years collapsed in days. German units were forced into constant retreat, moving through forests, swamps, and ruined cities under relentless pressure. The G43, with its fast rate of fire, helped small groups of defenders delay Soviet advances long enough for others to escape encirclement. Rearguard actions became more common. German units often left behind a handful of soldiers to slow the enemy. In these small groups, the G43 played a larger role than its numbers would suggest. A single rifleman with a semi-automatic weapon could create the illusion of a stronger force, especially when firing from multiple windows or shifting positions quickly. The echo of rapid shots bouncing off stone or wood complicated Soviet estimates of enemy strength. That confusion bought time, something retreating units desperately needed. Soviet snipers noticed a new sense of boldness among German riflemen. The G43 did not turn these soldiers into elites, but it allowed them to challenge marksmen more directly. A rifleman who might have remained hidden in earlier months now held a vantage point longer, firing repeated shots towards suspected sniper positions. he understood that even if his aim was not perfect, the volume of fire made it harder for a sniper to line up a countershot. This change in behavior forced sniper teams to operate with greater caution. Within Soviet reports, descriptions of the G43 became more detailed. Snipers wrote about the danger of its rapid fire and how it disrupted planned shots. Infantry officers noted how German defenders used the rifle's speed to create sudden bursts of resistance during retreats. These observations were recorded carefully because the Soviet command wanted to understand any weapon that influenced their advance. The G43 was not considered a masterpiece of design, but it was acknowledged as a threat that required respect. German soldiers also grew more skilled in choosing positions that favored their rifles. They learned that firing from elevated angles allowed them to cover wider ground and create more threatening fields of fire. Experienced riflemen used narrow openings, cracked door frames, broken ceiling holes, or gaps between stacked debris to limit exposure while still taking advantage of semi-automatic fire. These methods reduced the rifle's weaknesses and emphasized its strengths. The constant movement of the German army during this phase of the war also changed how the G43 was used. Soldiers often fought in short, violent bursts before retreating again. The rifle's ability to deliver fast shots without complex manipulation suited these conditions. Bolt-action rifles required more deliberate motion and more consistent bracing. In the chaos of mobile defense, the G43 offered speed without sacrificing too much accuracy. It allowed defenders to strike, fall back, and strike again. Still, the rifle's flaws remained. Mud clogged the gas system quickly. The recoil made long sessions of firing difficult. Magazines could bend if stepped on during retreat. But soldiers learned to balance these weaknesses with battlefield experience. They cleaned the weapon whenever possible, protected magazines carefully, and limited long-range engagements that demanded perfect stability. Through pain and practice, they reached a point where the G43 felt almost predictable. It became a weapon, shaped not just by engineers, but by the hands that carried it. As Soviet forces pressed deeper into occupied territory, sniper activity increased in pursuit of retreating German groups. In these tense exchanges, the G43 continued to disrupt traditional sniper advantage. A marksman taking aim at a retreating column could be forced to withdraw immediately. Once a German rifleman returned fire with the semi-automatic, even inaccurate shots forced the sniper into movement. This movement cost time and created opportunities for German units to regroup or escape. In the final months of 1944, the rifle had reached a kind of peak usage. German troops, though exhausted and constantly retreating, wielded the G43 with skill developed through countless desperate engagements. Snipers adjusted their approach, infantry changed clearing tactics, and commanders modified strategies for urban assaults. By the late summer of 1944, retreat defined much of the German experience on the Eastern Front. Entire divisions fell back across rivers, through forests, and into the ruins of towns flattened by artillery. Roads filled with refugees, broken carts, and columns of exhausted soldiers. Every retreating unit needed time to reorganize, and every minute gained meant the difference between escape and encirclement. In this chaos, the Gewehr 43 became a strange kind of equalizer. It was not perfect, yet it provided what German soldiers needed most during this stage of the war: fast, responsive fire that could slow the enemy long enough to survive the collapse around them. Rearguard actions became the defining moments where the G43 proved its worth. A handful of German infantrymen could hold a ruined intersection or a forest path against a force many times their size. Unlike bolt-action rifles, the G43 allowed defenders to create the continuous pressure necessary to delay Soviet troops advancing in tight formations. A burst of shots from behind a collapsed wall forced attackers to scatter and seek cover. Speed became a weapon in itself. Soviet infantry, pushing through these contested zones, quickly recognized that the pace of fire had changed. A normal German squad could fire only so quickly. But when even one or two men carried semi-automatic rifles, the entire rhythm of the fight shifted. Advancing troops no longer met evenly spaced shots. Instead, they encountered rapid bursts that punished hesitation. This forced them to use smoke more often, to call for machine gun support earlier, and to move with greater caution. Every adjustment slowed the advance, buying valuable time for the retreating Germans. Snipers supporting the Soviet infantry felt this impact even more sharply. They had grown used to identifying lone German riflemen and eliminating them with well-placed shots. But a rifleman with a G43 rarely exposed himself the same way. He shifted quickly, fired from unpredictable angles, and used his semi-automatic bursts to suppress potential sniper positions before they became a threat. Even if those bursts were not perfectly aimed, they scattered dust, chipped stone, and broke the stillness snipers needed for accuracy. A sniper who hesitated in the middle of a shot risked losing the opportunity entirely. Urban areas made the effect even stronger. During the retreat through the outskirts of places like WWII and Grodno, narrow streets and alleyways turned into echo chambers for the G43, bouncing off walls and creating confusion about where the shooter stood. A Soviet unit might think it was receiving fire from 3 rifles when only 1 soldier was holding the line. This illusion mattered. It forced squads to slow their entry into buildings, to double-check corners, and to expect resistance where there might be none. German commanders understood these advantages. Even if the rifle had not been part of their original doctrine, many issued G43s to the most dependable soldiers who remained. These men took positions behind piles of rubble, overturned wagons, and gaps in collapsed structures. They watched for movement in the dust and fired short, controlled bursts that spread uncertainty through Soviet ranks. Even during desperate withdrawal, their fire created space for medics to evacuate the wounded or for officers to form new defensive lines. Inside Soviet sniper reports, descriptions of these engagements grew more urgent. Marksmen wrote about targets who fired too quickly to counter. They spoke of moments where they had the perfect shot lined up, but were forced to pull back because debris and dust obscured their view. They described urban terrain where every dark opening felt like a potential threat from a G43. The rifle did not defeat sniper teams directly, but it reshaped the environment where they worked. It made once familiar firing lanes unpredictable. In forests west of the Berezina River, the G43 revealed yet another trait. Its power and rapid fire discouraged Soviet attempts to flank small German positions. A burst of shots into dense undergrowth made it hard for attackers to guess the defenders' exact location. Leaves flew, branches cracked, and the shifting pattern of impacts made precise movement dangerous. This forced Soviet troops to advance more slowly and rely on heavier weapons, adding even more delay. Despite the growing pressure of retreat, German riflemen continued refining their skills. Experience taught them when to switch from precise shots to suppressing bursts, when to change positions, and when to stay still. They learned how to blend the G43's speed with the discipline of older fire tactics. Many understood that they were not trying to win decisive battles. They were trying to survive long enough to reach the next defensive line. In this role, the rifle excelled. The pace of fighting intensified as German units approached the borders of East Prussia. Every kilometer westward became harder. The Soviet artillery grew heavier. Their armor surged forward, and their infantry gained confidence with each captured village. But the G43 ensured that even collapsing units could still deliver sharp resistance. A semi-automatic rifle, crude in appearance, gave retreating soldiers the ability to inflict sudden bursts of danger that slowed a seemingly unstoppable enemy. For Soviet snipers, these moments left deep impressions. They realized that the rifle they had once dismissed for its rough design now forced them to change their approach. They could not linger in exposed positions. They could not assume that a lone German rifleman would be slow or predictable. The G43 had created a new kind of battlefield moment, fast, jarring, and filled with risk for anyone who remained still too long. Germany's situation had turned from difficult to hopeless. Entire armies were pushed back toward East Prussia. Supply lines collapsed under constant pressure. Winter approached again, bringing cold winds that cut through ruined towns and open fields. Nothing could slow the Soviet advance completely. Not armor, not artillery, not defensive lines that crumbled almost as soon as they were built. Yet among all the failing structures of the German war machine, the Gewehr-43 continued to appear on the front lines, held by the last groups of riflemen who refused to give up their ground without a fight. The rifle's impact did not save Germany, but it left an impression that outlasted the collapsing front. Soviet forces advancing through Poland encountered the G43 repeatedly in rearguard pockets. Even when German units were reduced to small groups, the semi-automatic rifle allowed them to fight with a level of intensity that surprised Soviet infantry. A single defender, hidden behind a stone corner, could unleash several shots in seconds, slowing squads that expected a weak final resistance. This speed disrupted coordinated attacks, scattering formations long enough for other German soldiers to withdraw to the next defensive line. The G43 did not create victory, but it bought survival. Snipers, who once dominated open streets and frozen tree lines, began treating every dark opening with caution. A rifleman without sniper training could still challenge them with a burst of semi-automatic fire. The threat did not come from perfect accuracy. It came from the rhythm of fast shots that forced movement and denied snipers the stillness they needed. Marksmen described these encounters in reports sent up the command chain. Many claimed that urban fighting became far more dangerous once the G43 appeared regularly. Shadows that once felt safe now carried the possibility of sudden, rapid fire. The psychological effect of the rifle extended beyond individual duels. The Soviet units advancing into German-held territory noted how every ruined building sounded alive with danger. Once the G43's sharp report echoed through the walls. Even inexperienced soldiers recognized the distinct tempo of its fire. That quick sequence of shots broke apart the sense of control that advancing infantry usually gained after taking a street or courtyard. The presence of even a small number of G43 rifles created pockets of resistance that left lasting impressions on those who fought their way past them. Meanwhile, German riflemen who had mastered the G43 through months of hardship carried their skills into the final defensive lines of East Prussia. They understood when to clean it, how to brace it, and when to fire in short bursts to maintain accuracy. This combination of experience and desperation gave the G43 its final battlefield expression. Soldiers used it not as a perfect tool, but as a dependable companion during the last phase of a losing war. They positioned themselves along forest edges, in ruined farmhouses, and inside abandoned German villages. Each shot fired from these positions contributed to the slowing of the Soviet advance. Those final weeks of 1944 and early 1945 produced some of the most intense close-range engagements of the war. Soviet units, clearing villages, found that German defenders, armed with G43s, refused to surrender space easily. In these moments, the rifle's semi-automatic fire became a symbol of stubborn resistance. A soldier behind a collapsed doorway could keep a squad pinned long enough for civilians to flee, or for supplies to be moved deeper into defensive territory. The rifle's value lay not in winning battles, but in shaping the final lines of retreat. When Allied forces began examining captured German weapons, they made detailed notes on the G43. American ordnance teams recognized its rough manufacturing, heavy recoil, and imperfect parts. Yet they also acknowledged its lethal speed and battlefield impact. Reports described the rifle as crude but effective and emphasized its danger when used by determined defenders. These evaluations helped shape future thinking about semi-automatic infantry rifles, confirming that even an imperfect weapon could influence tactical doctrine if placed in the right hands. Soviet post-war documents echoed this perspective. Engineers and officers analyzed the G43 alongside other captured rifles. They noted its rapid fire, its integration with optics. Although the G43 did not directly inspire Soviet designs, the lessons learned from facing it encouraged the development of weapons that balanced reliability with speed. The rifle had left its mark not through beauty, but through the way it forced adaptation. For the snipers who survived the Eastern Front, the memory of the G43 remained strong. Many wrote in memoirs about the surprise they felt during their first encounter with its sudden burst of shots. Others described nights spent scanning dark alleys or forest paths, aware that the next flash of muzzle fire might come faster than they expected. The rifle had changed their battlefield, altering the balance between precision and speed. It did not dethrone the sniper's skill, but it narrowed the gap between specialist and ordinary riflemen. As the German army continued its retreat toward final defeat, the G43's story reached its natural conclusion. It had been born out of desperation, shaped by necessity, and honed through countless engagements. It never achieved the legendary status of other wartime weapons, yet those who faced it understood its significance. The rifle's legacy was written in the dust of ruined cities, the forests where retreating groups made their last stands, and the cautious movements of snipers who had once felt invincible. In the end, the Gewehr 43 could not change the outcome of the war, but it changed the experience of those who fought in it. It forced new tactics, created unexpected danger, and earned respect in a war where respect was rare. The rifle that looked too crude to matter became a weapon that soldiers remembered long after the final shots faded.